So let's talk about today's gospel because it is a gospel that comes on the Sunday right before we start Lent. So tomorrow we start Lent, and it's very excited for it and for the journey that we're going to be on together. And the gospel of today is giving us some insight on what are important spiritual practices that we need to have and incorporate in order to grow. These are instrumental and fundamental spiritual practices that everybody's Christian life should entail. We should have each one of these practices, and there's three that the gospel highlights. First one is, let's see if we're still waking up. What were the three that were highlighted in the gospel? I know you're probably thinking, like, we are the few that are awake and here, and now you want us to be here and listen, right? On daylight savings, right? What were the three practices that were talked about? All right? To give, I'm going to add to that almsgiving. Okay, almsgiving. Good. What are the other two? Fasting and prayer. Okay? Almsgiving, fasting, and prayer. Those are the three practices that are highlighted in the gospel of today. Right? And as the Lord was highlighting each one of these practices, there was something common that he said between each practice, right? He emphasized doing these practices in a certain way. And what he was emphasizing in this practice, in each of the practices, was that each practice should be done how? In the secret, right? In the quiet. Not in the open, not for anybody else to see, but in the secret, in the quiet. This is how he wants us to practice these three. And the question that we want to wrestle with is, why did he emphasize on all three that they should be done in the secret? Because when you do things in the secret, right, when nobody else is looking, it tells you what your motivations are or are not. And likewise, when we do things in the open, we have hidden motivations that make us do things or say things or pursue after things, right? So the intent and the motivations that are propelling our actions and our practices are really important. And they're really important because at the end of this life, when we go before the heavenly kingdom and we're before Christ, what is he ultimately going to look at? He's going to look at the content of our heart. He's going to look inside and say, what's happening? Well, what's happening inside of us are our intentions, are our motivations, right? They're driving us. And one of the things that our intentions and motivations, one of the things that our intentions and motivations are tied to is our sense of value as individuals, right? That when we are trying to gain a sense of value, it can propel, it can motivate us to do certain things, right? If we are looking for a sense of value among friends, our motivation may be to be recognized, and so we may say something or act in a certain way. If my sense of value comes from, having a certain amount of possessions, it's going to drive me in a certain career or in a certain, pathway or a work habit, right? So our motivations and intentions are really important because they are tied to our sense of value, and our sense of value is an integral part of what it is to be human. That each one of us is aware of, whether we're conscious of it or not, is aware of wanting to be affirmed, is wanting to know that I am valuable, that I'm accepted, that I'm loved. So much of what we do in life is to pursue after this, right? To know that I am accepted, to know that I'm of value, to know that I am truly loved. So many, if not all, of our motivations and intentions are geared towards this. Right, are geared towards this. And so with that in mind, let's look at these three practices that the Lord has articulated for us in the gospel of today, which comes from Matthew chapter 6, part of the Sermon on the Mount, which is Matthew 5, 6, 7. Okay? And so he's talking about almsgiving. And when we look at almsgiving specifically, we want to hone our definition and understanding of almsgiving is that it is giving to those who are less fortunate, giving to the poor, giving to those who are in need. Right? Taking from what is mine, and it is not solely financial, all right? Giving can be financial, but it is also of your time, of your possessions, of your resources, of your thought, of your energy, your activity, giving to those who are in need, helping those who are in need. This is almsgiving. It is an important practice. It's an important practice because, as St. John says in the first epistle of St. John, he's like, if we do not love our brothers, how can we say that the love of God abides in us? So the ability to give to somebody is tied to or serves as a litmus test to the extent to which God's love is dwelling in me. Because what did God do? He gave. And He gave generously. He gave of His time. He gave us of His power. He gave His ear. He gave us tremendously, right? And ultimately, He gave us His life. All what He did was one action after another of giving. And so to say that the love of God abides in us, but then there is no almsgiving that we see in our lives, should be a warning sign to us. Serves as a litmus test to say, okay, well, how richly does the love of God abide in me? But as I was saying before, we want to look at all these three practices, and we're highlighting that the Lord asks us to do it in private because that tells us about our intention and motivations. Right? Because when we truly do things in the secret, in the quiet, where nobody else sees it, it tells us our motivations. Because a lot of things we will do in public because they will be recognized. But when it comes to me and God and absolutely nobody else, a lot of the things that we would do, we stop doing. And that tells us something about our motivations. And so when we alms give, but now we're challenged to alms give, all right, and serve others when nobody else will see it, nobody else would recognize it, tells us something about our value. That our value, let me make sure I get this right because I wrote it down, all right? Our value is not rooted in the possessions we have, but our value is rooted in what we give. It's not in what we possess, but our value is in what we give. Right? There's so many, scriptures that say it is more blessed to give than to receive. When we look at Christ Himself, what did He do? He came and He gave. So our value is in the action of giving, not in the action of receiving or possessing or having. Right? This world trains us to realize that value comes in what we possess, or in the status that we have, or in the things that we have around us, or in the size of our bank account, right? So this is what society tells us, gives us a sense of value. But the gospel of today is saying our value comes not in what we possess, but in what we give towards others. So now let's look at prayer, because prayer is an important one, because prayer is our way of communicating with God. It's our way of establishing our relationship with God. And when we have a life of prayer, right, a healthy life of prayer, we have a healthy relationship with God. But if we don't have a healthy life of prayer, and our prayer is very broken up, then our relationship with God is broken up. And so for us to have a good relationship, I want you to think of any of the good relationships that you have in this world. How much time do you spend communicating with that individual? If it is your spouse, how much time do you spend communicating with your spouse? If it's with your children, how much time do you spend communicating with your children? Any good relationship, any healthy relationship takes a considerable amount of time investing in the communication. Likewise with God. When we invest our time in a relationship with Him, it deepens our relationship. When we invest time in communicating with Him through prayer, it deepens our relationship with Him. We have a healthier relationship with one another. But when we look at really healthy relationships, okay, they take time and they take energy, right? They're not going to be overnight successes. These are going to be things that we sow over and over and over. And when we talk about sowing something over and over and over, and we're saying it's going to take time, that time is going to come at the cost of our ability to produce. Right? That time is going to come at the cost of our ability to produce. And we live in a very production-focused society. You are produced. If you're a student, you have to produce certain grades. You have to get in certain, recommendations and have certain, experiences on your resume. If you're in work, you have to meet certain deadlines. If, whatever the situation you're in, there's always a drive to produce. You must produce something. And in order to produce, it takes time. What is the first thing that always tends to fall off of our plate when we get busy? Prayer. Prayer. Happens to me. Talk to many people. It's a common thing that when we get busy, what goes off of our plate? Prayer. I got to take care of. I have to meet the deadline. Prayer goes off. Why? Because we look at the time that we spend in prayer, and what does it produce? By every standard of the world, nothing. It produces nothing. By the standard of the world. Okay? So, when we are pushed to produce, and our value is tied to what we produce, clearly then when we come to an activity or a practice that doesn't produce much by the standard of the world, it will fall off our plate. And now the Lord is saying, okay, do this in silence. Right? Do this in the silent. Do this in the storeroom of your house, in the closet where nobody else is going to see. And I want you to spend time there and cultivate the relationship with me. It's going to come at a certain degree of production. I shared these thoughts with the YAM meeting on Thursday, and somebody brought up a very interesting point. They said Pope Carolus, when he was serving, right back when he was alive, he spent several days out of the week in prayer, and with the remaining time, he served and he managed the church. Right? He took care of his duties as the Pope. But he spent several days secluded in praying, few days working, and he was criticized for it. Like, why? You're no longer a monk, you're the Pope. Yes, you're a monk, but you're serving as a Pope. So come out and work. Come out and do the things that we need you to do. But he reserves several days for prayer and few days to take care of the administrative needs. And now, how do we look at Pope Carolus? One of the greatest modern day saints that we have. But the production, his value was not in the production. His value was in the time of prayer that he spent secluded, that nobody saw. So our value is not in what we produce, but it's in who we are relating to. Our value is relationally based, relationally grounded in Christ. Because when we spend time with Christ, we actually see the full extent of our value to Him. And our value to Him is unchanging. Right? He doesn't look and say, oh, I really want to love you, but you haven't produced that much at work. Right? That's not the way He looks at us. Our value is not in what we produce. Our value is relationally based. And Christ does not waver in how He values us. Let's look at the last one, fasting. Right? When we look at fasting and we look at the abstaining of food, and we look at it not so much in abstaining from certain types of food, but in kind of a pure sense of fasting, it's the abstaining from food, not giving the body what it wants, right? Not feeding its hunger, not feeding its desire. And in the process of doing that, in the process of disciplining our body, what we ultimately find is what we are working towards is self-mastery, is not letting the body control us, but rather us controlling the body. Fasting helps us in this. And when we work towards this self-mastery, when we have this degree of discipline that is cultivated through fasting, what that ultimately helps us do is control the passions of the heart. Not just the food that we eat, but it helps us control the passions of the heart. It helps us control our desires, helps us control our sin, and helps us have the amount of discipline that it needs to stay away from certain sins, to stay away from certain behaviors or addictions that we may have, right? And so the Lord says, do this in the secret. Fast in the secret where nobody knows. Don't disfigure yourself. Don't walk around. Okay, tomorrow we start Lent. I know by week 2, everybody will be like, I'm so sick of veggie burgers. And, we're going to begin the complaining and the countdown and stuff like that. What he's saying is fast. Let's not talk about how difficult it is. Let's not commiserate together on how long the fast is and why do we need to do this, right? We're losing the value in it. We're losing the value in it when we do that. So he's saying do it quietly, knowing that it provides you a pool of discipline. It provides you the pathway to self-mastery, because when we master ourselves and we begin to detach ourselves from sin, we live as free individuals. Always look at somebody who is stuck in a vice or an addiction. It is an example of what it is to live enslaved, not free. They may want to quit, but they have fed the body so much that the body now rules them. And their desire to be free, no matter how pure intentioned it is, because they've fed the body, they have now been enslaved. And so fasting provides us this opportunity and this pathway to free ourselves up from the different things that enslaved us. And so sense of value comes in freedom, being able to freely choose, being able to freely respond in an appropriate way. How many of us, in certain situations that we know are going to be tense, know that I'm going to go into that situation and I know I'm going to react like this. I know I'm going to lose it. I know I'm going to be angry. Let me ask you. I have to ask myself this too. Am I a slave or am I free in those situations? I'm a slave. I know I should act a different way, but I know when I'm in that situation, I'm going to be angry. And I'm going to fight in a certain way. I'm going to say certain things. Are you a slave? Are you free in that situation? We're a slave. We're a slave to our emotions. We're a slave to our desires. We're a slave to our appetites. And we are okay with devouring our brother, our sister, our spouse, our children, or even, acquaintances. We're okay with that, which is not the spirit of fasting. The spirit of fasting is what we use to work towards freedom. And clearly, the free person is more valuable than the enslaved person. So we look at these 3 practices: almsgiving, prayer, and fasting. And we're told to do each one in the secret. And when we almsgive, we realize our value is not in our possession, but in the relationship we have. Our value is not in our possession, but in what we give. And when we pray, our value is not in what we produce, but it's in who we are connected to, which is God. Our value is relationally based. And in fasting, our value comes in our freedom, not our enslavement. Now, the other thing that the gospel said in all 3 is that you do this in secret, and the Lord will reward you openly. Right? The Lord will reward you openly. What that may look like for each one of us, the options are endless. Right? But what I do want to say is that imagine a person who they realize their value is in what they give. They realize their value is rooted in God and in not what they produce. They realize their value is in freedom and not being enslaved. And you put those together, how does that person walk on this earth? What does their life look like? They walk powerfully, humbly but powerfully. They walk secure. They walk healthy. That is a reward in and of itself, to be able to walk detached from the need to produce, be able to walk and be able, and while you're walking and meeting different people, able to give and give generously, right? To walk this earth and be freed from all the different snares and things that are trying to enslave us. How much of that is a reward when we walk this earth? And that reward will be fulfilled in the life that is to come. Each one of these practices, almsgiving, prayer, and fasting, are essential practices. We do them in the quiet because they are related, because we want to check our intentions and our motivations. And our intentions, our motivations are important because the end, God looks at the heart of the individual and he sees what's inside. And he is not fooled by what it happens externally. He ultimately goes and he says, I will be the judge of the heart. So he tells us, he gives us the work to do to realize that our value is in what we give, our value is in who we love, and our value is in being free. That's the reward. That's the blessing. Let's take a minute of that, and I want you to focus on one of them, either almsgiving, prayer, and fasting. Say, which one of these can I do in the secret? Right? And how can I do it in the secret? Glory be to God forever. Amen.